Hi, I'm Melissa. I'm going to teach you how to make a round table skirt. The first thing we need to do is take some measurements, and the first measurement we want to take is the radius from the center of the table to the floor. I marked the center of the table earlier. From the center of the table to the floor is 42.5 inches. The diameter of our table skirt will be twice that, plus an inch for hems. Using the measurements I took earlier, I've drawn a sketch to show you how we're going to figure out how much fabric yardage we need, how we're going to seam the fabric together, and how we're going to cut the circle out to make the table skirt. Okay, now for the math. We measured 42.5 for our radius earlier. We're going to multiply that times 2, which gives us a finished length of 85 inches. We're going to add 1-inch hems, which actually means that we will add half-inch hems all the way around, because by the time you get from one side to the other, that makes up 1 inch. 85 plus 1-inch hems equals 86 inches. That's the cut length that we need to cut on our circle. So, the fabric is 54 inches wide, and we're going to allow a ½ inch for seams, which means that we'll only be using 53 inches of the center piece. That means we have to take a second piece and split it into 2 panels to add onto either side so that we can cut our full circle. 86 inches minus 53 inches leaves 33 inches. But we also have to allow for seams there too, so I'm adding a ½ inch for seams there too. That means we have 33.5 inches that we need to split in 2 to make the 2 panels. That means each of these 2 panels needs to be 16.75 inches wide. That's what I'm going to cut. To figure out how much yardage we need, knowing that we need 2 86-inch panels means that we need 172 inches of fabric. Divided by 36 inches in a yard equals 4.75 yards. That's how much fabric you need to buy. If your fabric has a pattern repeat, you'll need to allow for that. I used a chalk and a yardstick to measure off my 16.75 inches for my side panels, and now I'm ready to cut them. I'm going to cut 2 of these. Notice that I've cut on the inside edge of the chalk line. You don't want to include the chalk line in your cut length because that adds another 1/4 inch. That'll mess you up come hemming time. So just cut on the inside edge of your chalk line. I've pinned the center panel and the side panels together with pins. Remember to put right sides together on your fabric. Now I'm ready to stitch. Pressing your seam open will help your tablecloth lie nice and flat on the table. Use some steam if your fabric allows for it. I've sewn my 16.75 inch panels onto my 54-inch piece on both sides. See, here's the other side. I folded it in half because it's easier to make half a circle and cut it than it is to try to draw a whole circle, especially when you have limited space. I've also marked the center of the tablecloth, and now I'm going to show you how to attach the string and the chalk to make the radius length that we measured earlier. We're going to get our radius by using this piece of chalk attached to the string. I'm now going to attach the string to the pin that I marked with the center point, and then I'm going to use this weight to hold it down while I draw the circle. Now I'm ready to draw the circle with the chalk. I've attached the string to the pin and weighted it down with a piece of granite, and now I'm ready to draw my circle. I'm going to keep the string tight. Doesn't have to be exactly perfect. Okay, now I've got my semicircle drawn. It's a half circle. and I'm going to be cutting through 2 layers to get a full circle. It's not exactly perfectly straight, but it's straight enough for me to have something to cut by, and I'm going to cut on the outside of the chalk line just to give myself a little extra wiggle room for my hem. All cut out and ready to hem. I think it makes sense to you now about the semicircle. There are several ways to hem your table skirt, but the easiest way is to press the hem in first using a hem guide and a hot iron. There are a couple of different ways you can do this. You can take your hem gauge and you can go around and mark a 1/2 inch like this, and then pin it at intervals. But since you're working with a circular piece of fabric, that's a little bit tricky. The fabric wants to flip back because some places it's cut on the bias. I've been sewing a long time, so what I usually do is just press as I go. I turn it under a 1/2 inch, press, move the table skirt around, turn it under a few more inches down the line, press some more, and then keep going until I've gone all the way around a 1/2 inch. Remember in the beginning we added an inch? Well, we're only pressing under 1/2 inch because we're going to have a 1/2 inch on each side. That equals an inch, and that will be our hem. I mentioned earlier that there are several ways to hem your table skirt, and I'm going to show you a couple of those ways now. If you want to make your own cording, you can, out of cutting fabric on a bias, stuffing it with cord, and stitching down with your zipper foot. Then you would take the cording, pin it to your tablecloth, stitch it close to the cording, and then you'd have a nice finished corded hem like that, with a little bit of stitching showing right along the edge. That's a little bit hard to do unless you're an experienced seamstress. And another thing is we would have needed to take that into consideration with our original measurements, because that's going to add another 1/2 inch of length on either side of the tablecloth. But if you did want to add cording, you could do it with ready-made, custom-made cord or ready-made cord. Here's a ready-made cord. You could stitch that down, and then you'd have a finished hem on the other side like that. That looks nice too. Or you can just stitch it with a very even stitch, maybe a 1/4 inch away from the edge of the fabric, and then it would have a nice finished edge with a stitch on it. But what we're going to do is we're going to use fusible webbing, which is the easiest way of all. Requires no stitching, no pinning. It just requires nimble fingers and a hot iron. Be careful that you don't burn yourself. Use a little steam and just go all the way around. Another thing that's nice about fusible webbing is it gives the hem a little bit of body, so that when you put it on the tablecloth, it's got a little stiffness to it, so it sort of stands out like a petticoat. I finished hemming my table skirt, and I'm giving it a final press, and I thought I would share a few ideas and suggestions with you while I'm doing this. Once you put your table skirt on your table, if you find that it's a little long on one side or not quite completely hemmed evenly all the way around, that might be because you cut out your circle to be a little bit more like an oval. If your circle wasn't really tight as you were cutting it out, that can make it be a little longer on one side than another. It's easy to fix that though. You can just pin it and rehem it on that edge where it needs to be rehemmed. If you've used fusible webbing, it's easy to pull it apart again if you reheat it with the iron, and then you can make your adjustment and iron it back down. Another thing I wanted to tell you is that if you want to make a table skirt with no seams in it, then you can use a double size flat sheet and then just cut out a circle that way. You can fold it in half and cut out a 1/2 circle like we did earlier. That's a good way to make a table skirt out of a lightweight fabric that's easy to wash and dry and won't shrink. And you can also make it out of maybe a solid and then use another piece of decorator fabric out of a print for a kerchief. You can make a kerchief by cutting maybe a 50-inch or 45-inch square, hemming it, putting tassels on the ends or cute little covered buttons, and throwing it across the table on the diagonal. That's a good way to use a print and a solid without having to match a pattern repeat if you use a floral or a printed fabric for your table skirt. Just a couple of ideas. Okay, here we go. Time for the moment of truth. Here it is, ready for a lamp and your favorite book, or a vase of flowers, or table setting for a meal. We did it!